Welcome to the first daily Bible reading commentary. I'll be touching on topics from Genesis through Exodus chapter 2. First topic that I want to talk about, just briefly, is the extraordinary care and preparation that goes into creating earth and creating a home for man, specifically man. I say this because of all the man was clearly created on the last day prior to God resting, which was on the seventh day. God, giving us light, giving us land to live on, unless we're going to just be swimming all the time. So he brought forth the ground, or the earth, and then produced vegetation and plants and put that on it. That was on day 3. Day 4, he created the stars and the sun and the moon. So the sun was to rule over the day, the moon was to rule over the night. And then on day 5, sea creatures and birds. But on the 6th day, he created livestock. He created, the Bible refers to it as beasts, and just other creatures that creeped on the ground. But also man. And even prior to God putting man in the garden, it says that God prepared the garden. Like he planted a garden and then placed Adam in the garden. And he brought forth, it says that God brought forth every tree that was pleasant to sight and then also good for food. So, some things to note about this is that it was very self-sustaining garden. God brought forth a mist that watered the ground, and at this point, Adam's not really tending to the ground. It's as I stated, preserving in a way, kind of sustaining. Granted, God's giving the things needed for all of the sustaining. But that's just one thing I wanted to point out. After the fall, how God still provides for man. So we know that Eve was beguiled by this serpent. He tells her, surely if you eat of this tree, it's not that you're going to die. God just knows that once you eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you'll be like him, knowing good from evil. So she believes him. She eats it, and then she also gives some to her husband, who the Bible says was also standing right there. And so they both eat it, and then they recognize that they're naked. God goes into questioning, like, where are you? Because once they realize they're naked, they hide, because they're ashamed. And God asked them, where are you guys? And they said, well, we're hiding because we're naked. He's like, who told y'all you were naked? And he says, well, the woman you gave me this fruit, and I ate of it. And then the woman's like, well, that serpent you put in this garden, he tricked me, and I ate it. So we go into a long list of cursings, curses that they receive: the serpents to crawl on the ground, the woman's to have pain in her childbirth. Another important thing to note is that her desire will be for her husband, and he shall rule over her. I would like to touch on that on another video, because I've had a lot of different thoughts on what that could possibly mean, and I want to touch on that on a different video. But man is also cursed the ground is cursed in man's curse. So it's saying, God says that the ground will produce forth thistles and thorns, and it's by the sweat of man's brow that he's going to be able to eat. So no more, none of this self-watering business. We're going to, you're going to have to work the ground until you die, plain and simple. And then after all of this, they put together some makeshift clothes. They sewed together some fig leaves, and that wasn't cutting it. God actually makes them some skins. This is, I believe, the first death of an animal, like, that needed to be killed. Because at this point, they're not surviving off of meat and eating animals. They're eating plants. There's a skin that's produced for their clothes. And so that's the slaying or killing of the first, not only animal, but anything. As soon as the fall happened, death entered the scene, you know. So that continues to be like a theme throughout, I mean, as I've read throughout the Bible, but it's going to continue to be a theme. When sin enters, there's death. They have their own children. Cain kills Abel. Jealousy, you know, sin. And this is another thing to kind of highlight on when sin enters, death happens. Because God even warns Cain. He says, when he gets jealous of Abel's offering, and God has more regard for Abel's offering, he says, why are you angry? Why is your face fallen? And he says, if you do well, won't you not be accepted? Just because I have more regard for you doesn't mean I don't care about your gift. He simply had more regard for Abel's offering. And he says, if you do not do well, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Again, sin enters in this situation. Cain ends up killing his brother Abel once, I guess he was just thinking, like, premeditated murder. So, I mean, it just continues, and it continues to spiral down. Of course, Adam and Eve have another child. They have Seth. From Seth, we get Noah. Well, not directly, down on the line. And then Noah, we have the flood. So interesting things to note with God is finding favor with God. We already find that between Noah and Seth, Enoch had found favor in God. Enoch did not die. He lived 365 years, and at this time people were living hecka long. Methuselah, the oldest person recorded to ever live, was 969 years. Enoch lived 365 years and then didn't die. He was walking with God, and God took him. If we say that today, obviously we think, okay, you died. But God literally took this man. Like, he just transmuted up to wherever and was, no longer here. So they did not bury him. They didn't have a body. This man was... And another thing to note, Adam and Eve had favor with God at this point. Prior to the fall, they were walking they were with God in the garden. And God was walking in the garden. And we messed that up, man. So then there was increasing corruption on the earth. And Noah finds favor in God's sight. So he's like, I'm going to save you and your family. We know how that goes. It's actually a whole year. That it's a year and some months that they're on the boat. And then the waters finally subsided and they're finally able to get off. But they ended up having children and all this other stuff. Noah has a whole bunch of children through Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem is the one who gives us Abram, who is later given the name Abraham. So God also has a covenant with Abram, direct child of Terah. Abraham does a lot of interesting stuff. In his travels, to save him and his wife, he often often lied and said that his wife was his sister, so that apparently Sarai, at this time her name was Sarai, was really beautiful. And so he made up in his mind, he said, if you just say you're my sister, these people are not going to kill me. Like he literally says, say you are my sister that it may go well with me because of you. looking out for his own interest. I mean, but every time he did this, the people were like struck with a plague. God was like, I'm not honoring this. That is your wife. Stop lying. And so, this is not the first time he does it, because he does it again. But Abram has a cousin. I know I'm skipping, going really fast, but I wasn't intending to like give a summary. I was intending to go over some things, but I did not write some stuff. So this is kind of scattered. Abraham has a cousin named Lot. No, a nephew named Lot. They separate because they're herdsmen and stuff. They started quarreling. Lot settles down in a place. Abram had to rescue him from there. God has a promise with Abram. Makes a covenant with Abram that he's going to have eventually have children, because Sarai was barren. She was eventually able to have a son, but it wasn't until after she gave her servant Hagar to Abram to have their son, because she had given up. She was saying, I'm going to have a child through my servant with you. So she didn't want to trust the process. She didn't want to do that. She wanted to act on her own. And Sarah gave Hagar to Abram to have her child. It didn't work out that way, because apparently Hagar flaunted that in her face, in Sarai's face. Sarai was also rude to Hagar and was like, you know what, you get up out of here with you and your son, because I don't like you anymore, even though it was her idea in the first place. But God had his hand in and protected Hagar over this whole situation. Because, you know, Sarai eventually told her, get out of here, get out of this camp, because I don't like you anymore. I don't even want to look at you, whatnot. So she had to, like, leave, and she was in the desert and almost nearly died along with her son, who is Ishmael. But God protected her and provided a well in the middle of this desert, and they were able to live. And so, I mean, God's protection over those that he cares for and then, like, loves is a continual theme as well. And during the covenant, Abraham's name is changed. It's from Abram to Abraham, and Sarai's name is changed from Sarai to Sarah. There's a lot of interesting stuff, incest and disgustingness that happens. Not gonna touch on that, but I'll very much say that that happened as a result of people taking matters into their own hands, when it clearly did not have to happen. In regards to Lot and his daughters, like, there's a lot. But this is after they came out of Sodom. So they had already seen a lot. They had witnessed quite a bit. Abraham intercedes for Sodom. Abraham's like, if I find this many people, will you save it? O Lord, be not angry with me. I will speak again, but this once. Suppose there are 10 found, and he settles with 10. Isaac is Abraham's promised child. You know, after they have God promises that Abraham's going to be able to have a child. Sarah's finally able to bear a child. First she thought it was funny. She thought it was comical. I find it funny. She's like, God catches her laughing, and he's like, woman, why are you laughing? And she's like, oh, I'm not laughing. I was like, you straight lying. Thought it was funny because she was old and she was barren, but she was not truly believing she's going to be able to have a child. So Abraham has Isaac. Isaac has Jacob and Esau. Jacob steals Esau's birthright. Joseph is the son of Jacob Jacob steals Esau's birthright because Esau is, after all, the firstborn. Jacob has to flee. Jacob is renamed to Israel. So even though he stole the birthright, he's still getting blessed. That's what I think when I think, God can really use anybody. This boy clearly came out second out of the womb and straight up stole Esau's birthright. But still from him, we're going to get the descendants, get the lineage of Christ. Jacob has Joseph and a whole bunch of other sons. Let's see if I can find out the names of them, because they're like the tribes. The sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judas, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's servant, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's servant, Gad and Asher. And so those were all of the sons. I think that amounted to 12. It should. So we know the story of Joseph, or perhaps have heard of it. Joseph is hated by his brothers, which he was an interesting character. He was, like, after he would have a dream, he was already not liked because he got this coat of many colors, and he was, like, just flaunting it, I suppose, but also probably just wearing it, minding his own business, because his dad made it for him. So, of course, he's going to wear it. But his brothers were jealous of him. Jealousy, sin, acting on the sin, death. Well, in this, it wasn't so immediate, but you'll see. When they get their blessings, it's an interesting situation, but I'm not going to talk about that. It's another thing. I think I should make another video on that. Is the blessings and curses are blessings that Jacob gives his 12 sons. But Joseph is, sold into slavery, goes to Egypt, he prospers, he does well. There's a famine in the land of Canaan, and the brothers end up having to come see their brother Joseph. They did not know at this time. He's just been promoted all the way up to, like, second in command of Egypt. Not just once, but twice, because he got put in a situation where the first time he was second in command, the wife of that person, Potiphar's wife, came for him. She was like, sleep with me. He's like, nah. And she grabbed his jacket and then blamed him for molesting her. But she was like, this guy was trying to get with me. Get him out the castle or wherever we live. And so he was put in jail. Then he's, good at interpreting dreams. And because he was doing that all while he was a kid, he'd interpret his own dreams. And he'd say, well, not interpret them. He would just say them and just be like, for example, he's like telling his brothers about his dream, about the stalks and stuff, bowing down before him. And so I think that was one. And then the stars also bowing down before him. His brothers' amount of stars and the amount of stalks all amounted to the number of brothers. He corresponded to the number of brothers he had. But even further, his dad also bowing before him in the dream, as a stalk or as a star, because these were two separate dreams. And Jacob was just like, they would ask him like, oh, so we're going to be bowing down to you and stuff? And he was like, he wouldn't say anything. He'd just be like, seems like it. And then, so after they, because they allow the jealousy to work on their mind, and they ended up selling their brother into slavery. This is one of my top favorite verses. And I just have to read this verse, because it's probably up there with one of my favorites. So his brothers are like, once Jacob dies, they're afraid that Joseph is going to come after them, and that he is going to seek revenge on them after all these years they sold him into slavery. They thought he would, exact his revenge, finally. They were for real, like, out here sad, really thinking that their life was about to end. Because he had that he was all within his power to do that, too. Think about his position and who he was, and had he shared that with Pharaoh, Pharaoh would have been like, oh, these people did that to you? by all means, you got whatever you want to do. And he's like, no. This is what his response is. Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, we'll provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So his brothers are concerned, like at this point, we're concerned, thinking that their youngest brother was going to, do something now that their father had died. And they probably were thinking, oh, he's only being nice to us because our father's still here. He sees this. But no, Joseph genuinely believed that God worked for his favor, and he was working in the favor of God, and giving God all the honor and glory. Even in interpreting the dreams, he said it's God that gives him the ability to do that. It wasn't him doing it on his own, because even the magicians and the priests that were to be able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams weren't able to do that. In the beginning of Exodus, we get into a little bit more of the history of Israel. A theme I would like to say starts off Exodus is faithfulness, or faith in God, because from Shipra to Puah to Moses' mother and even his sister, there's a lot of faith being put in, like the unseen God. Keep in mind, yes, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. This was after he wrestled the angel and demanded that God bless him. Interesting person, interesting character Jacob was. So his name was after he was blessed, his name was changed. That's something interesting as well that I would like to point out, is like, when after you receive a blessing, something has to change. Like like your name is changed. I think if we took more note of, like, when we received great blessings after we've prayed and stuff, they wouldn't go so unnoticed, or they wouldn't be taken for granted. Like, say for instance, I had to change my name after I received a blessing. I wouldn't forget that blessing. My whole namesake has been changed, like, to something to help me to remember that blessing. And I think that's also echoed in the history of Israel as they move about, which we're going to get into throughout Exodus, because Exodus is talking about Israel, making that transition outside of Egypt, because they had to relocate to Egypt after Joseph, provided some land for his family. They were kind of positioned right outside of Egypt, or to be more specific, they were in the land of Goshen. And I don't know the relation of Goshen to Egypt, but I imagine it's pretty close, because over some time, the descendants of Jacob, or they grow increasingly in numbers, so much so that Pharaoh is intimidated by their great numbers, and he's like, we need to do something about this. So he actually he told these Hebrew midwives, Puah and Shipra, if the Hebrew women are to birth sons, that they're to kill them. They didn't listen to Pharaoh because they didn't honor him like that. They said, no. First off, no, that's not what we're going to do. And secondly, they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh. And their lives were spared because they obeyed the will of God in this situation, and not Pharaoh. And they were, instead of saying, like, Pharaoh was like, these numbers aren't going down, this doesn't make sense, I told you guys to take care of this. And when Pharaoh inquires about, like, why are they still increasing, even though I told you guys to kill them if they have sons, they replied and said, because the Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. The Bible says that God dealt well with the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and blessed them. In chapter 2, we get the birth of Moses. Moses is descended from the house of Levi, again, one of the sons of Jacob. So the Bible says in chapter 2, verse 1, a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife, a Levite woman. So she bore and conceived a son. At this time, they didn't name him. He actually got his name from, it's an Egyptian name, meaning to be drawn out of water. So he's named actually by Pharaoh's daughter. Did we get her name? They just call her Pharaoh's daughter. Okay, so we stopped with chapter 2. So I'll go all the way up to 3. Moses's mother puts him in a little baby boat and has faith that God's going to protect her child. The sister of Moses his name's later going to be Moses, to watch him on the way. And so when baby Moses is found in the water, Pharaoh's daughter opens the basket, sees there's a baby, and Moses' sister comes forward and she's like, would you like for me to find somebody to take care of the child or to nurse the child? She offers, I can go find a woman to nurse the child for you until he is of age. The sister's able to do that, and she's actually able to give Moses back to his mom so that she can nurse her child for Pharaoh's daughter. So that's faithfulness, and the way it was played out was just awesome in that Moses' actual mother was able to take care of her son up until he was of age to, grow up in the palace or wherever. So then he's a young adult and he sees an Egyptian man whipping, this is Moses, whipping a Hebrew slave. And Moses looked around and he struck down the Egyptian. The next day when Moses went out, 2 Hebrews were quarreling with one another, and then they ended up engaging in a fight. And Moses stopped them. He was like, why are you two fighting? Why do you fight each other? And then they were like, are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? So they saw him kill the Egyptian. And so from this, he thought surely Pharaoh, his adopted grandfather, would hear about this. And so he didn't want to be subjected to that, so he ran and fled to Midian. And while he's in Midian, he meets his wife Zipporah. God speaks to him while he's in Midian, and he says, go back to Egypt. I want you to deliver my people. And that's where I ended. Because the outcry, it says that God heard the cry of the Israelites, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God saw the people of Israel, and God knew he was going to keep his promise. Another continued theme. All right, that's the end of today's commentary. I hope you guys have something that you got from it, and if you did, please feel free to share that with me in the comments. Let me know what you think about it. I also like to hear what you guys think about this specific passage. Feel free to comment that below, or any topics that you think I might have missed. I would like to study those more in depth and look at them.